We're back, you guys, with Carl Davis. Welcome, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know it, and congrats on the book, 600 Generations. Now, I'll tell people a little bit about your background. I mean, I know you as a friend, but I also know from that you worked as an archaeologist for many years for the U.S. Forest Service in the various regions in Montana, right?
Correct.
Well, did that lead to your interest in documenting the generations of Native Americans?
Yeah, over many years of practicing archaeology and doing public archaeology, just trying to get people to understand that the indigenous cultures that were here, I thought I got a lot of questions about really basic things, and so I said I need to write a book and try and cover that ground. And so while I was working for the Forest Service, I really didn't have time, but when I retired, I jumped in and tried to write this little public archaeology book.
Yeah, that's a great, I'm going to make sure, I didn't ask you to clip on this, Mike. Sorry, people at home. I want to make sure people can hear you really well. So you had been able to use your archaeological research when you had the time to write the book?
Yeah, over many years I thought, oh, this is a really important site. For example, there's a site called the Anzac site, which is one of the first. It's 13,500 years old. It's an Ice Age site, and there was a little child burial, and it's really an important site. And so I thought, that's an obvious one. And then I picked some other sites that were later in time that were equally as compelling, at least to me. So I wrote about 12 different sites that.
So that's the structure of the book. Like if someone were to pick up this book, and Scott, did you show a picture of it? Oh, thank you. So this is, I think, from your publisher's website. Just so people at home could see the cover.
Right.
Too. So if people were to get the book, what they would expect is a journey through 12 different archaeological sites. So you describe each one in relative detail and what was found there. And are the sites once discovered, are they then preserved, or are the artifacts removed and then a 7-Eleven goes in? Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is it then repurposed, or are some sites so important that they're kept there?
It's a combination. Some sites are so important that they've been left as is. There's a site, a 9,000-year-old site called Barton Gulch, and it was disturbed by placer mining many, many years ago, but it was purely an archaeological research project. On the other hand, there's a site where people lived in pit houses, which is fairly rare, and this is about 5,000 years ago, and that was discovered because of a pipeline project.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so they dug up part of the site to effectively remove the site from harm's way, and they built the pipeline, but there's still significant pieces of the site that are still left, so it's sort of a combination.
Yeah. And I think this is really pretty important. Like, for instance, I'm thinking I did a show not too long ago on the Lewis and Clark Traveler's Rest. And quite a big deal was made, when it now is representing Western European culture, people are falling over themselves like, oh my God, this happened here. But then in terms of the land that we are occupying, that was somewhat violently taken away from its previous owners, it seems like there needs to be a sort of redress of importance that the book may help address as well, that there were cultures well before the European discoveries of this land, and that there were structures, use of utensils and implements that could describe a lot about the adventure of human history.
Yeah, I always joke that we live in the United States of amnesia,
Right.
and we're really focused on Western European culture and the indigenous peoples that lived here, as you say, that were more or less conquered through land grabs and genocide. Their story has sort of been overlooked and forgotten in history classes. When I grew up, nobody talked about native cultures. And that's changed with Indian Education for All. You know,
Right.
there's been a significant improvement of that, but still the larger context and bringing the archaeological information to bear on that larger story. I still think we have a long ways to go. And I feel pretty passionate that we need to have more information about Indigenous peoples that lived 8,000, 5,000, 200 years ago. We know a lot about Irish miners, we know a lot
Yeah.
about Norwegian homesteaders. Why shouldn't we not know a lot about the Crow people, who are certainly as important to the history of Montana as Irish miners?
Yeah, that in that context, that's so true, right? And then when one thinks of how you can learn from other cultures, you know, the connection, let's say, between myself and an 8,000 year ago Crow cultural ritual is no different than me being in ninth grade and being taught Greek mythology via Edith Hamilton or someone
Right.
like that. You know, that someone has arbitrarily decided, oh, here you are youth, and I will connect you to this time and place and culture. So good on you for having the foresight and dedication to bring these archaeological sites to life in your book. And it's lavishly illustrated. I read that somewhere.
Yeah, I had artist-illustrator Eric Carlson, who has done shows around Missoula and elsewhere, and he was available. He's a friend of mine, and he did the illustrations. So I came up with the ideas to sort of portray in these little vignettes that I've written about each site, and then he illustrated them quite wonderfully, and that made a big difference. And the publisher, Riverbend Publishing out of Helena, really was very generous in allowing me to use a lot of colored photos, because
that's
that's
great.
expensive,
Yeah.
and so it was really wonderful that they sort of bought all in, because I think that really draws in. For a lot of people, archaeology is a little dry and dull.
It can be, unless there's this enthusiasm behind the survey.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really pretty volume. It's available, right, in what they call trade paperback or something.
Yeah.
That's what I read, and I saw it. If people, dear viewer, if you're watching and you're interested, Riverbend Press, right? And that'll do them the most good if people purchase it directly there. Because I also saw it on Amazon. I was looking for something else. But I thought, I'm going to look for Carl's book too. It was there.
Yeah.
But I think I don't want to overkill it, but Scott, if you could show so people at home could just get a little idea of Eric Carlson's illustration, right? Is that him on the
Yep,
on the
that's on the
cover
cover.
as well?
Yeah.
And this is, if you were to recommend an age, would you say for educators, like, don't visit this upon K through 8, but that high school and above, that they would be able to appreciate it?
Yeah, you know, when I wrote it, I was trying to reach down a little to lower levels of schooling, but you know, this definitely is more of a high school, certainly college age. It's written very succinctly and simply, I think.
And for a broader
but
audience,
for a
you had
broad
that in
audience.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful children's book that's just recently been published by Lori Travis about plains archaeology, which would cover a lot of the same ground, and that was published by Mountain Press.
Oh, yeah, Mountain Press, right on 3rd Street.
Right
I
on
think.
3rd. So, you know, when I first started the project, several of the academic publishers said, we already have one book about Montana archaeology, why do we need more? And I'm like, really? You know, most states have multiple books covering a wide range of things. So now we have 3 or 4 books, including mine, that gives readers who are interested a lot more options. And Lori's book is a good one for, you know, the primary and secondary.
Yeah. So people are watching too, and then you're interested in fulfilling some of that. We referenced it in our conversation a little bit, the Indian Education for All, right? And that came from like the State Office of Public Instruction, and eventually said, you know, considering the context in which we're all living, people should really learn about the ancestors of the state of Montana. And they kind of built that requirement into the K through 12 curriculum. So to a degree, you think at high school level it could help fulfill that. requirement.
Yeah, and I hope it does. You know, to me, I think a lot of our current political issues involving Native American peoples, whether it's the management of the bison range or hunting rights, treaty rights, you know, the simple fact that there's lots of private inholdings on reservations. Why is that so? You know, and I think without having a deeper understanding of how we kind of got to that point, then it's hard to really look with much positive energy towards resolving it, because there's such ignorance. And I think, you know, there's a lot of ignorance about Native peoples in the state and their long history and how they got to where they are now. And I try and cover some of that in this book. And so that's why I think for high school kids and certainly college students, you know, I think this fills in kind of a niche. You know, the hubris is I'm, you know, I'm a non-native writing a book about Native Americans, and my hope is this is a foundation for the many Native archaeologists that are coming kind of online now to tell it in their own way, and I did a little different way. But so this is written sort of from the quote Western science point of view, and I tried to fold a lot of the Indigenous viewpoint. I had tribal friends review chapters and, you know, offer comments. So I think it's a little more inclusive, but eventually hope, you know, tribal archaeologists will write their own histories far better than I can.
A humble observation, a humble note on which I guess I have to leave you, but thank you so much for taking the time to come to the show and let people know about it. I know I got to move along. I'm not paying enough attention to the time, dear viewer. But once again, we've been visiting with Carl Davis. He's written a book called 600 Generations, which covers 12 significant archaeological sites of Native artifacts, Native civilization within the state of Montana. And you can get it from Riverbend Press. You heard it here.